Welcome into the Email Online podcast. I'm Mason Voth, the managing editor of Email Online with Rivals, as we cover K-State as often as we can and every single day, whatever you need K-State related. You can find that information over on Email Online at kansasstate.rivals.com. Get signed up today if you're not, just under $10 a month if you want to go ahead and do that. So that is something that you can do to keep up with the Cats. You can also follow along right here on the Email Online YouTube page or in these podcasts that both go up on Spotify and Apple. You can subscribe to both. That way, every time there is one, you've got it. As a one-man show, and in the summer, there's a little bit, they're very less frequent, but the frequency will start to pick up in the coming weeks as football is getting closer and closer. August 2nd is when practice is going to start for the Wildcats, so we'll start to have a lot more going on there, and certainly as we get closer to kickoff against SEMO, get a lot going on there. Today, though, a lot of the focus, and really only the focus, is going to be on the basketball side of things. There are three things basketball related to hit on to get everybody up to speed this week. Number one, we'll knock out the Jon Rothstein report yesterday that really gave us zero new information. It was almost like getting negative information, as in terms of, we didn't get 1% more information. We got like negative 1% more information. We learned nothing from Jon Rothstein's report, and I'll explain that in a minute. Then number two, dive into the Big 12 basketball schedules. We don't have the full dates and times and all that stuff figured out yet, but we do know the matchups that are going to be in place for K-State and the 13 other schools that are in the Big 12 for the upcoming season. Discuss the draws, kind of the significance of the opponents and where they're going to be played, some of the things that we've learned about the scheduling maneuvers, and then we'll move on from that point and finish it off real quick with some thoughts from what I saw at TBT on Thursday night, watching the K-State alumni squad, purple and black, play. Just a lot of fun to see those guys back in some version of purple and playing in front of fans that still remember them and enjoy and give them that love. And also we'll throw in, as any good person in the Big 12 has to do, some likely shots at George Kliavkoff in the Pac-12 at the end of all this. Is Pac-12 Media Days didn't go as well as George would have liked it to have. So we'll dive into all that and everything else. Real quick, though, we will start with the news that Jon Rothstein, I guess, thought that he was breaking yesterday. I don't get it. What was going on there, what the point of it was. Basically, what Jon Rothstein had put out yesterday was that K-State and Jerome Tang are finalizing a contract extension. Here is what he said in the report, though. Kansas State and Jerome Tang are finalizing a contract extension, multiple sources told College Hoops today. Official terms of the deal are TBD. There is no timetable on an official announcement. That's all it says about this thing that gets put together, because then everything else is Rothstein plugging K-State, their record last year, going to the Elite Eight, being College Hoops Coach of the Year last year, and then looking at the fact that they're number 35 and his Rothstein 45. We knew that Jerome Tang will to happen when you're as successful as Jerome Tang and you win a National Coach of the Year award. You take a program from the bottom of the barrel in the toughest league in the country to a team that finished third, and if they had just taken care of business against two lowly opponents that they should have probably handled and not had hiccups against, they're right there in the conversation for the Big 12 title in his first year. Like, even without any inside information, you knew that Jerome Tang was going to be getting a contract extension and a pay bump, because other schools are going to come calling, and you want to make sure that guy is your guy for as long as possible. So that's why the Rothstein thing, I mean, it came out and it seems like, oh, hey, maybe we get some details in this. Like, maybe, Jon Rothstein, a national guy, he is as close as he can be with everybody that will listen to him. So maybe he had something there, and you open this up and you think, okay, maybe we're going to see that Jerome Tang has a contract extension through 2032, and now he's getting a $500,000 pay increase every year or more than that. Like, again, nobody knows the details, and that's exactly what Jon Rothstein communicated. So we don't know what it's ultimately going to look like. So Yeah, I guess it's, a nice thing in the middle of the summer as things are going on. There's not much happening. Like, don't let people forget about Jerome Tang, and don't let people think that K-State isn't about to take care of him, because they are working hard as they can. But I almost feel like, obviously Chris Kleiman got his raise and contract extension. Like, at that same time, we told John Ema Online, and I know a bunch of other people that cover K-State were also telling you this. Contract extensions and raises were in store for both Chris Kleiman and Jerome Tang. Both would be coming. Both would happen before their respective seasons kicked up the following year. Chris Kleiman's is already done, and we know that Jerome Tang's is going to be done most likely before the season tips off in November. So the Jon Rothstein thing, whatever, nice to put it out, I guess, but I didn't want anybody out there thinking that this news was missed in some reason, or why maybe it wasn't covered as much by most outlets as what Rothstein is doing here. It's just because everybody knew that was in the process of happening, or at least I think they did. And if you didn't, then that's no fault to you. But it's just one of those deals where there was no substance to what Jon Rothstein posted yesterday. Anybody in the world could have come up with that report. I mean, you could have walked down Main Street, Lawrence, and asked anybody on the side of the street, and they may not even be the biggest basketball fan. They would have been able to tell you, yeah, K-State's probably working on a contract extension and raise with Jerome Tang. Like, everybody that has any inkling of thought about basketball, at least in the Big 12 or close to K-State, knew that this was happening. So not a significant or groundbreaking deal. And again, I'd give a lot more validation and respect to this report if we got any nugget in here that wasn't already known, other than terms of the deal, TBD. Timetable, there isn't one. So don't worry about it. It'll get done at some point. Jerome Tang obviously happy with what's going on in Manhattan right now. And as much as Chris Kleiman likes working with Gene Taylor, Jerome Tang obviously seems to appreciate that as well. Another key thing in all this, and this is a larger point just to throw in here about the nothingness of this, but a larger point in Jerome Tang and Chris Kleiman getting extensions and being excited to sign on long term or get a pay bump and get these resources. Obviously, Gene Taylor deserves a ton of credit. He got that in some fashion with his AD of the Year award that he got this past season. He deserves a lot of it anytime you think of him. But another guy that deserves a lot of credit for this is Richard Linton, the new president at K-State, because he is a guy that is aware of how important athletics is to a university, and he is going to help find a way to put time and resources and give his support to that. But he's also, I don't think he comes across as a guy that is going to be so hands-on that Gene Taylor is getting handcuffed by things. And ultimately, Gene Taylor is acting more of the assistant AD, and then the president is more like the AD. I think he supports and gives a lot to the athletic side of it and understands it. But he also understands that he's got a guy in place in Gene Taylor that is really good at it. He's the athletic director. Let him direct athletics, and I will just be here for the support and whatever advice I need to give when I can. I think that there are a lot of situations throughout college athletics where you get a president that doesn't see the value in the athletic side or thinks that you can kind of cut corners there. Hey, fans are always going to show up for football and basketball games, so it's not the most important thing. Like, whatever, we can take it easy here. A lot of those things I think can happen, and there are a lot of things that were associated with the past president at K-State, Richard Myers, that, number one, just there was no qualification for him to be a university president. Like, we'll just throw that out there. Great K-Stater, great American, great at the stuff that he did in the military, but there really was no qualification for him to be the president at K-State, other than the fact that he got to be the interim because, hey, it was nice to have a guy with his accolades as the interim president. It made sense, but probably was there a little too long. And there were moments where he was handcuffing K-State athletics. Now you have a guy that totally gets it, and I think that's important for K-State. And that shouldn't be lost in any of this either. Like, when these contract extensions and raises come through, obviously for Jerome Tang and Chris Kleiman, they deserve a lot of credit when they happen because they're the ones that earned these. Their staffs deserve credit, Gene Taylor's credit, and don't forget about Richard Linton, the K-State president, in the mix of all of that. So that is the topic of Jerome Tang's contract extension. Moving on from that, though, the big news that came out yesterday was the Big 12 announcing the basketball opponents, both men's and women's, came out. So now we know who the K-State men and women will play this upcoming season. That's significant. It's always good to know the details. It's like in the NFL now, like you always know who is going to be played, but we still freak out about the schedule release. And in college basketball, it's like a brand new world, and even better because now you don't know who you're going to play, and now we get to wait until early fall, late summer to figure out actually when the games will be played. But we do know who K-State will be playing next year, and the way that the scheduling format worked out for the Big 12 as it currently stands, it'll probably adjust next year in some way. But now that there are 14 teams in the league for this one season, each school will have a home and home schedule with 5 other teams in the conference. So for K-State, there are 5 schools that they are going to see twice this year, once at home, once on the road. Kansas, that is going to be a permanent thing. That was in the announcement that K-State and Kansas are going to have permanent home and homes. Makes sense. They are 2 in-state rivals. They have a long history. They've played each other multiple times every season going back, probably close to 100 years now, maybe closer than that. So that makes a ton of sense. The other schools that K-State will see multiple times this year are BYU, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. Other home games that K-State will play will be Baylor, UCF, Oklahoma, and TCU. Now, the 4 road games, the teams that will only be played on the road, Cincinnati, Houston, Texas, and Texas Tech. So that's the way that it ultimately ends up working out. Now, breaking this down into, okay, what kind of draw did K-State get? How is all this going to shake out? Well, obviously, there's nothing that needs to be said. Anytime, and it makes sense. And I think with Jerome Tang, there is less of this fear of Kansas now. I think that he is bringing in guys, and he has this program in a position where it's not like, it's Kansas. Like, it's a big game, these guys, but they feel like they are on an equal footing with the Jayhawks. And I also think that's an important thing that came out of winning that first matchup with them last year is you got the win out of the way quickly, and now you feel like you were on the same level as them. Obviously, this staff feels like they are and are wanting to try to be at that spot, and that's important. So even with all that, you're already going to be a little bit hammered with the scheduling because you're playing the best team in the league twice every single year. It's just going to happen. That's okay, though. We would be complaining if you didn't get Kansas twice every year. So that's okay. It's just the nature of the situation, how that ends up working out. BYU is another team that you're going to see twice. I think that if some of these teams that are going to be on K-State's schedule multiple times, getting BYU, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia, that is a win. That is a win that other Big 12 teams may not get the opportunity of, and we'll talk about those briefly after addressing the Cats. But those are 3 teams that I don't envision having very strong seasons this coming year. Obviously, the calculus on West Virginia has changed a little bit, but even before the Bob Huggins stuff went down, I was skeptical on what West Virginia was going to do because the talent they had put together was flimsy in some sense. Obviously, a lot of individual talent there and a lot of individual expectations, but guys that didn't meet them in some places or guys that for one reason or another were flawed and needed to look for a new home despite how talented they were. And I think that that's one benefit to what K-State has had happen here. Obviously, Arthur Kaluma was at a very good program in Creighton, but it's a lateral move or a step up in what he's done with going to K-State. Obviously, for Tyler Perry, it's a major step up for him going from Conference USA to the Big 12, and they've elevated. It's the same type of logic with guys last year. They got different roles, whatever that came in. It was a better situation. I think it's always a little scary when a guy like Kirk Kriisa, for example, at West Virginia, why is he not at Arizona anymore? He was starting games. He was playing a lot for a team that was one of the best in the country, but Arizona underachieved in the NCAA tournament the last 2 seasons. And there are some Kirk Kriisa things that may not jive, and there's probably a reason why he's not on Arizona's roster this year. And that's, probably to some extent, Tommy Lloyd's the choice, the Arizona coach. So I think that that's one thing to take into consideration. West Virginia, I was not high on them even when they were acquiring a lot of this talent, it was eye-popping. But even before the Huggins stuff, I figured they would probably finish outside the top 5 in the league. Now, with the circumstance, you lost more players. Josh Eilert steps in to take over for a Hall of Fame coach. I think that this is just going to be like a powder keg. We don't know what West Virginia is going to be like this season for a lot of reasons. West Virginia is probably a middle of the pack team, and getting one of those that could finish middle of the pack a little bit lower in the standings twice is a win, because some teams, again, are not going to be afforded that opportunity. Oklahoma State, same type of deal. Talented team at times, but we know that they've never been able to shoot under Mike Boynton, and they are basically the definition of mediocre in the Big 12. If Oklahoma State played in any other league last year, they are probably an NCAA tournament team. But they were not of the caliber of a Big 12 team that could make it to the NCAA tournament. And they're just, I think they're always going to be right there on the cusp under Mike Boynton. But one thing that they don't ever seem to do is have the ability to take down the top teams in the league. They can get anybody basically 4 through 14 this upcoming year. But if you're anticipating being one of those top 3 teams or in the mix for it, I guess it changes now. Probably not even top 4, because like K-State's going to be more of a top 4 than a top 3 team with the fact that you've got KU, Houston, and Baylor now. But those top, 3, 4, 5 teams, they haven't really been able to beat them. Everybody else in the league, they've been able to have a pretty good go against. But Oklahoma State is a team that you're not ultimately worried about seeing twice. Same for BYU. It's going to be interesting to see how K-State reacts going to Provo for the first time. Obviously, there's an elevation change. It's a different environment that they've never been in before. But BYU, similar to their football team, is likely going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year, just from the circumstance of what they're coming from to what they have to do. The last couple of seasons have not been the best for BYU basketball, even in the West Coast Conference. Now they have to jump all the way up from the WCC, which, yes, has Gonzaga and St. Mary's that have been good. San Francisco was all right the last couple of seasons. BYU was still finishing below all those. They were struggling and not putting together BYU-like seasons that some people had come to associate the Cougars with over the last decade. And they do not alarm me this upcoming year. So I think K-State made out pretty good with the opponents that they got in the home and home. I mean, the situation with some of those, like, you look at them and say, hey, those are games that you should be able to win. Now for the rest of the home schedule, you get the bonus of Baylor at home. It's nice to have that game at home. We saw how Baylor reacted in Manhattan last year. K-State just kind of cruised in that second half against Baylor. They were able to take control, never really look back. It's important to get a team like Baylor at home. The other ones, UCF, Oklahoma, TCU, those are teams at home K-State probably shouldn't have too much of a concern about. And TCU is going to be a better team this year, I think, than what they were even last year, although they do lose Mike Miles, fake good player, if you've listened to me at all over the last 2-3 years. But they're still going to be pretty good. I just think we saw last year the loss in Fort Worth. It can kind of just be a weird place to go to. And honestly, a decent environment if you go there at the right time of the year. But it's beneficial to have those at home. I think the home draw for K-State, in terms of what you're going to have to go up against there and kind of solidify yourself, is probably good. Like, you're looking at, if you're K-State, another home schedule where you're saying we should go 8-1 or 9-0. That's how I think K-State should look at it. And then from the outside, what the fan perspective should be on this, K-State should probably be 8-1, 9-0 with this home schedule that they have upcoming this season. That put them in about the same spot. As for the road games, obviously the first 5 we already know about: KU, BYU, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. The other 4, these are the road only games for K-State. K-State didn't get the worst draw in this setup, but it is one of those that is a little unfortunate. So it would have been important if K-State had gotten Houston at home. I mean, if somehow the schedule worked out and they got kind of unbalanced and they got to play Houston at home instead of UCF and they flip-flopped those, you would have taken that in a heartbeat. That would have been really good for K-State because Houston obviously is now one of the best teams in this conference. They've been one of the best teams in the country for the last 5 years, and it's important to get games like that at home, especially if you don't have to make a return trip. The one thing about Houston, though, is the Fertitta Center has been redone and all this other stuff. It's small, and they don't always draw the best, even despite being one of the best teams in the country down there. So it's not the most intimidating place to play. In fact, we saw a lot of times in the American Athletic Conference. I mean, I've been in Wichita now for getting close to starting my third year now. But if you look at it, like, these AAC opponents have gone in there and they've hung with Houston. It hasn't been an intimidating place. In fact, the Cougars have suffered some conference losses there over the last couple of years. So the Fertitta Center isn't something to necessarily fear. It just would have been nice for the purposes of getting a team like that to play in Manhattan, in Bramlage. Would have given K-State a leg up, but I don't think you lose anything by going on the road to face Houston other than just the normal nature of a road game. Same type of deal for Cincinnati. We'll see what Wes Miller does. This is going to be his third season as the head coach of the Bearcats now. The first two, he's been trying to pick up the pieces after the John Brannon situation. So we know Cincinnati, they lose Mick Cronin to UCLA, and he goes, gets everything rolling there. And then they bring in John Brannon, who had been the head coach at Northern Kentucky, did good things with NKU, and got them into the NCAA tournament. They were a player in the Horizon League most years, and he gets the Cincinnati job. That's the COVID season. They come pretty close to making a case to be in the NCAA tournament. They lost to Memphis in the AAC title game that season, or Memphis or Houston, one of those. But they lost in the AAC title game, came up just short, whatever. John Brannon got fired, though. It was an up and down year, weird year for Cincinnati. And even in the COVID year, one season, they fired John Brannon for other reasons. Was not liked. Some things went on. They kicked him out. So then they decided to bring in Wes Miller. He had been the head coach at UNC Wilmington. He played at North Carolina for Roy Williams, and a very good young coach, but he's yet to really get the ball rolling at Cincinnati. I think they had a pretty good transfer class this year, though, at least for their standards. They will be a tricky team to face, I would say, but I don't think at this stage you should fear going to Cincinnati at this point in the process. However, the two road games that are tough draws for K-State, number one, Texas Tech. Again, Texas Tech isn't at the talent level yet of K-State, even with stealing Joe Toussaint from them. But we know that United Supermarkets Arena has become one of the, I mean, at this stage, probably one of the three toughest places to play in the Big 12. I mean, obviously, Allen is number one. And then you can make the case that Bramlage and United Supermarkets Arena are obviously right there. When it's right and rocking, it's good. And Texas Tech is going to be a good team this year. They'll be better just from the standpoint of Grant McCaslin is a good coach, and he's not Mark Adams. And then throw in the fact that if there is this buy-in from the fan base going to Texas Tech, that is a tough place to play. Obviously, it got K-State last year, even with a not-so-good Texas Tech team. They also beat Texas at home last year. So Tech was able to do some things at home. They always are. That's a tough draw for K-State as well, because the Wildcats have gotten some pretty flat Texas Tech teams when they've played Manhattan. The last one is Texas. The Moody Center doesn't seat as many people. They block off the top of the arena, but what they've done with the Moody Center has now been able to get it to a point where it is an electric crowd. You're going to face a really talented Texas team again, a team that's also coming off an Elite Eight appearance, and they've got one of the most dynamic transfers in the country, Max Asmus, maybe the best transfer in the country outside of, I think Hunter Dickinson probably still deserves that title that ended up at KU, but that in itself is a tough draw for K-State. And then in addition to that, I mean, obviously you have to go to Allen and Ames. Those are tough as well, but those are things you kind of have to embrace. I mean, those are easily K-State's two biggest rivals in the Big 12 for the past couple of years and moving forward, obviously. And so you're likely to see KU and Iowa State every year. So what that means is you got to take care of business at home against them. If you know it's going to be tough on the road, go ahead, take care of business against them at home. And if you lose those road games, you feel like it's kind of a net payoff there where everybody's kind of all square. Now, for the Big 12 as a whole, here are some nuggets that I think are interesting in all of this. for the home and away setup. So the teams that have to play these teams multiple times, the teams that got probably the toughest draw in all of this, I would give the nod to KU in this respect. The Jayhawks, they are going to have to play twice this upcoming season. Probably the three other teams that are going to be picked in the top 4 with them this coming season. Not BYU, excuse me. I was looking at the Iowa State one. Baylor, Houston, K-State. Those are 3 of the teams that they have to play twice. So already you've got 6 games against teams that you know are going to, or at least proved in past years or on paper with Houston, that they can compete with you. They are going to be towards the top of the league, or at least considered for that honor. Now, you do miss Texas home and home, so that's obviously good. But the fact that you get both Baylor, Houston, and K-State, that's a tough draw. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are the other 2 teams that they get in there. The one thing that is nice for KU in this, they only play the one game against Texas, and it is a home game. So that's nice. Whatever, move that on. Their toughest road games are going to be at Iowa State and at Texas Tech. That's just how it's going to work out. UCF and West Virginia, we'll obviously UCF's not. UCF is going to be the absolute worst place to play in terms of atmosphere and everything else that goes on in the Big 12 as it stands right now. But obviously we know what Iowa State, Texas Tech bring to the table. We'll just have to see what West Virginia is like this upcoming year because of all the circumstances going on there. Other schedules that stick out in the home and home setups, obviously anybody else that feels like they drew 2 of the bigger opponents, as we've talked about with K-State, their home and home setup is ultimately not that bad because outside of Kansas, you don't expect BYU, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, or West Virginia to end up in the top 5 of the league, fringe top 6 teams there. But there's like Oklahoma State, they get KU and K-State both in the home and home setup. That's kind of a tough pull. You look down, Texas is in that same boat. They will face both Baylor and Houston twice next season. And given in that mix, their toughest road game will be at KU. They don't really have another one that stands out. They will get K-State, Iowa State at home, so you avoid trips to some more difficult places to play in the league. But those are really the only things that kind of stick out in this. Baylor is a team that I think got a pretty good draw in how this worked out. They get Texas both times. They get Kansas, so they do get those top 2. But their road games, K-State is really going to be the toughest one that sticks out there. The others are UCF, O State, and West Virginia. And their home games are Cincinnati, Houston, Iowa State, and Oklahoma. Baylor is a team that, and we'll see how it works out when they actually get ordered, but the schedule there is probably about as good as you could have asked for the Bears. Up there, obviously, I think with what K-State kind of got in the mix here, because Texas has to face both Baylor and Houston twice. And we know that KU has to face 3 of the teams that are probably top 5 teams next year multiple times. Houston only gets 2. So it's all up to interpretation, but I definitely think that KU probably got the shortest end of the stick, and that just comes from being the marquee brand and wanting to make sure that you have, as the Big 12, you have KU against other teams in your league multiple times, if you can max it out, that are also going to be games that people want to see. We know that the K-State KU game did really well ratings-wise for ESPN last year, the game in Manhattan. And then, of course, they're like, well, yeah, that worked out so well. Let's just keep the other game on ESPN+. I doubt that happens this year for K-State KU. But this is the Big 12 wanting to make sure that their top products are playing each other. And that's why I think KU got the short end of the stick in all this. Obviously, they are the team best equipped in the Big 12 to handle it. But I will give a little bit of leeway to the KU side and say that it's not necessarily the most fair shakedown for how things played out there. But if you want to take a look at the full announcement and matchups from the Big 12, you can find it on their website. We've also got it up on email online as well. Last thing I wanted to hit on K-State related, TBT Thursday night. I was there in Koch Arena watching the Purple and Black. They advanced. They will play tonight as I'm recording this, 6 o'clock. They will face the Arkansas alumni team. That was a good showing for the Purple and Black. last night. And the consensus from a lot of people, the players, the coaches, they say, hey, it's the depth this year, having younger big guys that can help us contribute, having some guards and depth at that spot, guys that can knock down shots, guys that have played more recently. It's big. Thomas Gibson was very appreciative of the fact that he got a little bit more rest in last night's game than he's gotten in past years. Jordan Enriquez Roberts was glad that he just didn't have to put on a uniform this year. And DJ Johnson also enjoyed it. And DJ Johnson still looks really good out there. Thomas Gibson knows how to get a bucket out there still. A lot of good stuff. And one of the guys that has played a significant role, and when the roster came out, I was like, people might laugh or whatever, but that is a huge addition. The fact that Bebe Ishiola is on the purple and black roster gives them a young big with fresher legs. It can give them depth, give them good minutes. And Bebe only played like 8 minutes last night, but he played, I thought, very well out there. And he was on the floor a ton, making a lot of hustle plays. That's a good pickup for K-State and their alumni team. And we'll see what they do tonight against the team from Arkansas, the alumni squad there. If they win tonight, they will have an off day Saturday, and then I believe it's Sunday that they return to action, where they would face off with that would be maybe their game against the Wichita State alumni, and then they would have another one if they won that even to try and advance. So keep that locked in. I believe the game is on ESPN2. Obviously, if you're not listening to this before 6 o'clock on Friday, then that's of no use to you, but just throwing that out there. The other thing that I enjoy about this, obviously, it's fun to see these guys back out there in purple, playing in front of fans that are going to be the best fans that they've had in their careers, because most of these guys played overseas, whatever else, great raucous environments in some of these places, but they don't care about the players as much, obviously. They care about the specific team. Obviously, people care more about K-State than any of the players on the team. But by way of that, you care a ton about these players. And guys like DJ Johnson and Kamau Stokes and Thomas Gibson and whoever else you want to throw out there, they have great significance and importance to K-State and their fans. And it's really cool to see this mix of guys all together for the purple and black K-State's alumni team, because just to see them either on the floor together or with the large group of former players that were on the bench coaching last night was also fun. So here's the breakdown of some of this. You have somebody in Bebe Ishiola who played on the Elite Eight team this past season. So he was there 2023 Elite Eight. And you can go all the way back to the look at Rodney Magruder was on the 2010 Elite Eight team. So was Jordan Enriquez Roberts, who's on the bench. So you have that going for you. And then you have all these guys in between. Kamau Stokes, another guy that was on an Elite Eight team at K-State, won a Big 12 championship with them. But the coaches last night, it was fun to look over and see Jordan Enriquez Roberts was taking on the role as head coach. He's also the GM of the squad. That's big. Joining him on the bench, you could go as far back as the Jim Wooldridge era. Clint Stewart was an assistant coach and on the bench. Curtis Kelly was on the bench with them. Rodney Magruder was on the bench with them. And I'm also pretty sure that I saw Wally Judge over there last night. I couldn't get a close enough look, but I'm fairly certain that Wally Judge was also with the guys on the bench. And even if he wasn't, that's still a great collection of guys that you have together. It's just a lot of fun to see this group of guys together. Jordan Enriquez Roberts talked about it last night after the game, where it's just these guys having the bond of being a part of the K-State family and getting together and doing this. They have a blast doing it, and it's a lot of fun to watch. Another nice addition is the purple and black. They are rocking probably the best uniforms they've had in the history of this tournament tonight in this year. They've got the cat scratches on the side, which is nice. And they also have the serpentine font on the front. They look good. It's a lot of fun to see, and we'll see if they can kind of keep going on. But they have a good, deeper squad this year. Unfortunately, no Desi Sills or Bill Walker like were listed on the roster. Would have been nice if those guys would have been able to participate, but for whatever reason, they weren't able to step in. Obviously, Jacob Pullen had to pull out as well. Different situations. We don't know the specifics of them, but unfortunate nonetheless. So really good stuff there. I'll end it by giving the shot at George Kliavkoff that was promised. Pac-12 Media Days went on this week. There was obviously some steam and momentum that a deal might be reached by Pac-12 Media Days, but it wasn't going to be announced. Then we got the report yesterday. I think it was from Dennis Dodd that, hey, no, a deal is not going to be done. Well, this morning, Friday morning, George Kliavkoff, similar to what all conference commissioners do at Media Day, they get up there, they take questions from the media in attendance, and George Kliavkoff had himself a day in a very bad way. Nothing has changed over the last couple of weeks and months for George Kliavkoff because he keeps taking loads of crap on social media, and it is very much warranted. So here are some highlights of what happened for George Kliavkoff today. I started to see these just gems of tweets trickle across my timeline. It made me laugh. So the first tweet I saw was from Ross Dellinger, who is now with Yahoo, with us here. He tweeted, Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff on timeline of TV deal. We are on track to announce our deal the same time everyone would have anticipated before realignment. The patience will be rewarded. He followed it up by saying, the longer we wait, the better our options gets. Then Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic, she tweeted another quote from George Kliavkoff that made me laugh. We are not announcing the TV deal today on purpose because I want the focus to be on football. When he answered like that, a follow-up question was asked, asking him to clarify, oh, does that mean that a deal is actually done? And he said to not read too far into the comment. There were obviously a lot of people on Twitter that were very funny about it. I think the most quick to the point, and this is the message that I've been, preaching the last week or two, came from very good radio host Dan Lucero in Topeka. If they had a deal done, he'd want to shout it from the rooftops. How is he so bad at this? That's the consensus from everybody. George Kliavkoff is terrible at the PR side of this and handling how he speaks, everything he says. You can go back to the alliance that he was a part of with the ACC and Big Ten, and now the media rights stuff. It's just very, very bad in how he has handled it. And obviously, they don't have a deal done. They are still searching hard to get a deal that they want, one that makes sense for them. And it's not going well for the Pac-12, and Kliavkoff did himself zero favors today. I would also push back at the notion that they're going on a timeline that would have been totally normal and fine had realignment not fired up again. They've got less than a year now until their TV rights deal is complete, finished, knocked out, whatever, and they still don't have a deal even announced or inklings of a deal that has trickled out into the public. To me, that's not a good thing. I think something as big and as meaningful and impactful to your conference as the money that comes from your TV deal, the thing that shows you to millions of people across the country, the fact that it's not done with less than a year before the current one is up, while you've only got 10 members right now and this thing seems to be falling out from under you, that is not a good thing. And I can guarantee you that this is not the timeline that the Pac-12 would have been on had USC and UCLA still been there, because I think this thing would have already been done. And people would have been like, yeah, we want your product. We want to have that. And there was a little bit more stability, so it was a safer bet with the Pac-12. Now you have this massive shift in media right now at the sports level where places are having to let talent go because of the money that's being involved. They're having to reevaluate, okay, which live rights do we want? They're being more selective about it. And the Pac-12 doesn't have a product that steps up right now. Number one, because they don't have as many even mid-tier brands. That's the thing that the Big 12 has on the Pac-12 is nobody in the Big 12 right now is on the level of some of the lower ones in the Pac-12. They are at a lower level. Now, do they have the better product at the top? Yes. Oregon and Washington are the two biggest brands of the 22 schools that are going to be in the Pac-12 and the Big 12 moving forward. But the Big 12 obviously has the depth, and they also have the more engaged viewership and everything else that comes with it. And that is something that I think is going to continue to hurt the Pac-12 here. They also just don't have the inventory. The fact that the Big 12 has two extra teams moving forward means that they are going to have at least one extra game that can be shown, whether it's basketball or football or whatever. there is a better inventory. You can move it around a little bit. You are going to get a lot of different things out of this. And I think the Pac 12 is still missing out on some of that. So go anywhere and just read up, because George Kliavkoff is not having a great reception here, and he doesn't deserve it. So, if anything, it just gives you confidence in what the Big 12 is doing. And there can be criticisms of Brett Yormark. He certainly deserves some. But at the end of the day, none of the criticisms can be as deep as what they are for George Kliavkoff. And even with some of the things that you can be critical or laugh at Brett Yormark for, he has still come in and gotten a lot of things done already that some people probably didn't think were possible for the Big 12 just over a year ago. And also, he's come in and just made really good moves in general with the TV deal, getting members locked in and continuing to look for new members, even though some of that stuff is part of what you can make fun of him for who he's looking for. But he actually has tangible good things that have been done. George Kliavkoff has not done jack since he got to the Pac-12, except for maybe realizing that they had some guys that were taking money when they shouldn't have in their TV deal and pocketing it under the last regime. And we heard about, they moved out of their fancy offices that they were paying a ton of money for. I mean, I guess he was a part of a team that realized that they needed to move past the last leadership at the Pac-12 that wasn't very good. But George Kliavkoff has done nothing in the years that he's been there now. He keeps opening his mouth. He went from wanting to be, the big guy in all this to now he's trying to play victim, and he's like the bully that threw the first punch, and it was a pretty weak punch though. A lot of bark, not much bite from George Kliavkoff, and he messed with Brett Yormark and the rest of the Big 12, and there was not much barking, but when they got barked at and they got bit finally, they bit back, and they bite a whole lot harder and a lot more ferociously than what the Pac-12 has. And there's actual tangible things that the Big 12 has done that are actually good. So the Big 12 continues to be in a good spot, leg up, and we'll just see if the Pac-12 ever gets this thing done. I'm sure it's happening sometime soon. I mean, that's what we heard last September, what we heard in December, what we heard in January, February, March, April, May, June, July, and here we come getting closer to August. So that is a look at everything going on, everything you need to know. We'll be back next week with another episode just like this, catching everybody up to speed on everything going on with the Wildcats and a lot more in the world of college sports. Stay locked in to EMAW Online over at Rivals to follow along with the Cats all throughout the season.